So good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I sincerely thank IAP Women's Cell Tripura State Chapter for organizing this wonderful webinar, and heartfelt gratitude to the IAP national team, especially Dr. Sanjeev Jha sir and Ruchi Varshne ma'am, and to our state IAP president, Dr. Birbor Devnath sir, Dr. Rini Chakraborty ma'am, and the entire team for their support and encouragement. It's a pleasure to have clinicians and learners who are passionate about neurorehabilitation. I hope this webinar adds clarity, confidence, and new ideas to your neurophysiotherapy practice. Okay, so today's topic is extremely important because neuroplasticity is the core scientific foundation behind every improvement we see in neurological rehabilitation. Whether we are treating a stroke survivor who regains hand function, a Parkinson's patient who walks with better balance, or a spinal cord injury patient who relearns stepping, every bit of progress happens because the brain and spinal cord have the ability to reorganize, rewire, and create new pathways. Despite being a scientific concept, neuroplasticity is not something that only happens in labs or research papers. It happens every day in our clinics, in every repetition, in every movement our patients practice. And that is exactly why understanding it deeply is essential for every physiotherapist. The goal of this webinar is not just to give theory, but to help you take back ready to use clinical strategies for stroke, Parkinson's, spinal cord injury, TBI, and other conditions. By the end of today's session, you will be able to confidently apply neuroplasticity principles to your daily practice and get better outcomes for your patients using the same time, same tools, but with a smarter scientific approach. So, thank you once again for joining. Let's begin our journey into understanding how the nervous system heals, adapts, and evolves, and how physiotherapy can guide that healing process. So moving on to the next slide. Before we begin, let's take a moment to understand what you will gain from this session. By the end of this webinar, you will be able to explain the concept of neuroplasticity and its scientific basis. Second, you can identify how neuroplastic changes support recovery in different neurological conditions. Third, apply key principles of neuroplasticity while designing physiotherapy interventions. The fourth is practical and evidence-based physiotherapy techniques that enhance recovery. And the most interesting and important, how to design a treatment session that truly stimulates neuroplastic change. Now that we have set the context, let's move into the core of today's session, understanding neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is one of the most powerful abilities of the human nervous system. It is the reason why recovery is possible, even months or years after a neurological injury. When we understand how the brain rewires, we can design treatment sessions that are far more effective. So, what is a neuroplasticity? This is the first section of our today's session. We will have 6 sections in total. So, understanding what is neuroplasticity. It simply means the brain's ability to change, reorganize, and form new connections. For many years, it was believed that the adult brain is fixed and cannot change, but that belief is now outdated. We now know that the brain continues to adapt throughout life, especially in response to learning, practice, and rehabilitation. This change can be structural, like forming new synapses. Functional means different areas of the brain take over tasks they previously did not handle. This reorganization happens in 2 major ways. The first is structural plasticity, as you can see here, uh, where growth of new synapses occurs. Also, there are dendritic branching and new neural connections occur. And the second is functional changes, where healthy areas take over functions of damaged areas, and remapping of cortical regions occurs. This is why a stroke patient whose right arm is fully paralyzed can regain movement months or even years later, because the brain literally rewires to form new pathways. And importantly, neuroplasticity occurs lifelong. It's not limited to childhood. Adults, older adults, and even very elderly individuals continue to show meaningful neuroplastic changes when we train the nervous system the right way. Okay, and neuroplasticity is experience dependent. What does it mean? It means that the brain changes based on what we do repeatedly. Practice builds pathways, and repetition strengthens them. And meaningful, engaging activities just amplify the effect. So we have seen all of this, all 4 things. Now moving on to the next slide. Why does neuroplasticity matter in rehab? Neuroplasticity is the foundation of all functional recovery. Whether a patient is relearning to walk after a stroke, regaining hand control after a nerve injury, or improving balance in Parkinson's disease, Every improvement happens because the brain is reorganizing itself. In rehab, our goal is not just to strengthen muscles, our real goal is to retrain the brain. When we give patients the right kind of practice, repetitive, meaningful, and challenging tasks, we activate pathways that help the brain form new connections. These new pathways replace or support the damaged ones. This is why rehab must be task specific and intensive. And if the patient practices random or low effort tasks, the brain won't change. But when we provide structured, goal oriented activities, we directly drive cortical reorganization. So, neuroplasticity matters because it turns rehabilitation from simple exercises into a scientifically guided process of rebuilding the nervous system. It is the reason recovery is possible. And why does neuroplasticity happen? The brain is actually designed to adapt. Every time we learn something, repeat a movement, or experience a sensory input, neurons fire together. Over time, they form stronger connections. This is known as Hebbian learning, which what we will study in the next slides. Neuroplasticity happens because the brain wants to stay efficient. When an area is injured, the brain doesn't give up. It recruits nearby neurons or even distant regions to take over the lost function. Repetition, intensity, motivation, and sensory feedback all drive this change. It also happens as a survival mechanism. When pathways are not used, the brain prunes them and strengthens the ones that are needed. So, in rehab, when we push a patient to practice meaningful tasks again and again, we are literally teaching the brain to rebuild itself. Okay, so this is why neuroplasticity happen. Now we will see the mechanisms of neuroplasticity. How does it actually happens inside the brain? These mechanisms are the biological foundation behind every recovery we see in rehabilitation. So the first one is synaptogenesis. Synaptogenesis. This means the formation of new synapses between neurons. This means the formation of new synapses between neurons. After injury, the brain actively builds new connections to take over lost functions. Treatments like repetition and task specific training stimulate this process, helping neurons communicate more efficiently. The second one is dendritic sprouting. Here, the dendrites, the branch like structures of the neuron, you everyone know about this, begin to grow new extensions. Think of it as the neuron increasing its reach to find new partners to connect with. This growth improves signal transmission and supports learning and motor recovery. The third mechanism is cortical remapping. After damage, the brain reorganizes itself. Undamaged regions can take over the roles of the injured areas. This is why functions like movement, speech, or sensation can return even when the primary area is compromised. Rehabilitation exercises help guide this remapping in a meaningful direction. And the finally is Hebbian learning. This is the classic principle. Neurons that fire together, wire together. I repeat, neurons that fire together, wire together. Every time a patient repeatedly performs a task, the activated neural pathways become stronger and more efficient. This is why high repetition and purposeful practice are critical in neuro rehab. Together, these four mechanisms synaptogenesis, dendritic sprouting, cortical remapping, and Hebbian learning form the scientific basis of how rehabilitation drives recovery. They show that the brain is not fixed, it's constantly remodeling itself in response to the treatment we provide. So moving on to the next slide. Okay, what triggers neuroplastic change? Now let's look at what actually triggers neuroplastic change in the brain. These are the core drivers that make rehabilitation effective. The first one is repetition. It is an important trigger. The brain strengthens pathways that are used repeatedly. Think of it like practicing a skill. More practice means stronger connections. In rehab, high repetition tasks directly stimulate brain rewiring. Next is intensity. Neuroplastic changes happen faster when treatment is delivered with adequate intensity. Means more effort, more activation, and more engagement within a session. Low intensity work produces minimal change. High intensity work accelerates recovery. The third is task specificity. The brain learns what it practices. If we want a patient to improve walking, we must train walking. If the goal is handwriting, we practice that exact task. And this is called task specificity. The fourth is error based learning. The brain neuroplasticity, neuroplasticity is also strengthened when patients make small, safe errors and then correct them. The nervous system learns from mistakes. This is why challenging tasks, not easy ones, promote better outcomes. And the last is motivation and reward. When patients enjoy a task or feel rewarded, dopamine is released, which enhances learning and memory formation. This is why engaging meaningful activities produce better neuroplastic changes than boring or passive exercises. So in summary, neuroplasticity is triggered when we combine repetition, intensity, task specificity, a challenge that allows learning, and strong motivation. These principles guide every effective rehab session. Now we are moving to the section 2 of our today's session, which is principles of neuroplasticity. These are the most important part of today's session, the 10 principles of neuroplasticity. These principles guide how we design treatment sessions, how we dose activity, and how we predict recovery. I'll walk you through each principle in simple clinical language. The first one is use it or lose it. This principle tells us that if a function is not actively used, the brain may start weakening the neural pathways responsible for it. For example, if a patient avoids using their affected hand, the brain gradually reduces its representation. So, in rehab, we must re engage the affected limb early and consistently. The second is use it and improve it. On the other hand, the more we use a skill, the stronger the related neural circuits become. Targeted, meaningful practice can drive measurable improvement. This is why repetition of functional tasks like grasping, reaching, or walking is so powerful. Third is specificity. Neuroplasticity is highly specific. The brain changes according to what you practice. If you train hand dexterity, you improve dexterity and not balance or speech. So we must match our intervention exactly to the patient's goals. The fourth is repetition matters. This is one of the strongest principles. Neural pathways need repeated activation to strengthen. Research shows that hundreds of repetitions per session, not just 10 or 20, drive cortical reorganization. That's why high repetition task training is essential. The fifth one is intensity matters. It's not just the number of repetitions, the effort behind them matters too. High intensity training, when appropriate for the patient, accelerates neuroplastic change. This is why protocols like constraint induced movement therapy and in CIMT deliver strong results. Now see the sixth one, which is time matters. Neuroplasticity is time sensitive. The best results often come when training starts early in recovery because the brain is in a sensitive period and more adaptable. But remember, plasticity can still occur even years later with the right stimulation. The seventh is salience matters. The brain changes more effectively when the task is important or meaningful to the patient. If a patient values holding a cup, cooking, or dressing independently, the brain pays more attention and the learning sticks. Motivation strengthens memory pathways. The eighth is age matters. Younger brains show stronger and faster plasticity, but older adults still experience significant neuroplastic change. It just may require more repetitions and longer training. This principle reminds us to adjust dosage based on age. The ninth is transference. This principle means that learning is in one context can enhance performance in another. For example, improving grip strength may help with writing, buttoning, or lifting objects. Positive transfer helps patients generalize skills to daily lives. And the last is interference. This is just the opposite of transference. Sometimes poor habits or maladaptive movement patterns can interfere with new learning. For example, compensatory shoulder hiking during a reach task can block proper arm recovery. So we must minimize compensations and promote quality movement. So these 10 principles form the foundation of neuroplastic rehabilitation. If we design treatment according to these rules, repetition, specificity, intensity, salience, we create powerful opportunities for real functional recovery. Okay, moving on to the section 3. Let's see some practical neuroplasticity approaches. How we actually apply neuroplasticity in day-to-day rehabilitation practice. These are practical, clinically usable methods that directly stimulate adaptive neuroplastic change. The first is task-oriented training. It means practicing real-life, meaningful tasks rather than isolated muscle exercises. Instead of strengthening a muscle in isolation, we train the task the patient actually wants to perform. And this approach works so well because the brain reorganizes best when the activity is functional, purposeful, and relevant. The first thing is task oriented training is goal driven. Treatment is designed around what the patient personally wants to achieve, whether it's combing hair, buttoning a shirt, walking independently, or improving hand grip for daily activities. Second, it is repetitive and intensive. We focus on high repetition practice because the brain needs multiple exposures to remodel neural pathways. The more attempts, the stronger the neural circuits become. Task-oriented training is task-specific. The patient practices the exact action they want to regain. For example, practicing sit to stand improves sit to stand, not leg press, not quadricep strength. A specific task creates specific neural changes. It incorporates problem solving and motor planning. The patient must actively think, adjust, and find solutions. This is crucial because neuroplasticity grows when the brain is challenged, not when movement is passively assisted. The environment plays a big role. We simulate real world conditions, such as practicing picking up objects of different shapes, textures, and weights to enhance adaptability and generalization. It encourages error based learning. The patient learns from mistakes. We allow small errors so the nervous system detects a mismatch and corrects itself, strengthening motor pathways. Task oriented training is meaningful when a task matters emotionally or functionally to the patient. Dopamine levels rise, and dopamine is a key neurochemical driver for plasticity. Okay, so seeing the second one, which is constraint induced movement therapy, which we shortly call CIMT. It is a specialized neurorehabilitation approach designed to improve the function of a weaker or affected limb, commonly after stroke or brain injury. The core idea is simple: restrict the use of the unaffected limb so the patient is encouraged and sometimes required to use the affected one. This forced use principle helps the brain reorganize neural pathways and strengthen motor control through repeated practice. In CIMT, the stronger limb is typically constrained with a mitt or sling for several hours a day, while the patient performs structured, task oriented activities with the affected limb. These tasks are meaningful, goal directed, and progressively challenging, helping the brain engage in neuroplastic change. As individuals repeat functional tasks like grasping, reaching, lifting, or manipulating objects, the brain forms new motor maps that support more efficient and independent movements. Another key element of CIMT is shaping, where therapists gradually increase the difficulty of tasks to match the patient's progress. This ensures the training stays motivating yet challenging. Intensive practice, constant feedback, and real life task repetition make CIMT one of the most evidence based methods to restore upper limb function. Overall, CIMT works because it combines high repetition, task specificity, intensity, and motor learning principles, helping patients break habitual non use of the affected limb and rebuild functional independence. So, overall, task oriented training is not just an exercise technique, it's a brain training strategy. It transforms rehabilitation from passive movement practice to meaningful functional recovery. When patients repeatedly perform real activities with purpose, the brain rewires faster, movements become smoother, and daily independence improves significantly. Seeing the third one, motor learning strategies. It refers to the set of internal processes through which patients acquire, refine, and retain new movement skills. In rehabilitation, motor learning strategies help transform practice into lasting functional recovery. These strategies are not random techniques, they are structured approaches that guide how patients learn movement more effectively by shaping practice conditions, feedback, and task demands. Motor learning begins with choosing the right type of practice. Block practice, repeating one skill many times, is useful during the early stage when a patient is just understanding the movement. However, as learning progresses, random practice, mixing tasks, or varying conditions helps improve adaptability and real world performance. Variability in practice strengthens problem solving, forces the brain to adjust to different contexts, and enhances long term retention. Feedback is another major pillar of motor learning. Knowledge of performance focuses on movement quality, while knowledge of results tells the patient how successful the attempt was. Too much feedback makes the patient dependent. So, therapists gradually reduce the frequency, allowing the brain to self correct. This optimizes learning and encourages the independent error detection. Motor learning also requires therapists to adjust practice difficulty, a concept known as challenge point. The task must be challenging enough to promote learning, but not so difficult that the patient becomes frustrated. Adjusting speed, posture, environment, or dual task demands can help maintain an optimal learning zone. Finally, motivation and patient engagement greatly influence motor learning. When